The heavily guarded perimeter of Buckingham Palace has just been hit by an absolute emotional earthquake, and the details leaking from the sovereign's private chambers are deeply troubling. Prince Harry believed that one final, deeply personal private appeal could single-handedly reopen the royal door he had spent years watching slowly close in his face. Instead, his raw written request reached Prince William at the absolute worst possible moment, and the devastating answer came back without a single second of hesitation. Prince William has officially and ruthlessly overruled his younger brother's desperate plea for a formal reconciliation meeting, with Princess Anne stepping forward to deliver an even colder institutional confirmation. The royal family's multi-year attempt to repair this fractured relationship is officially over. It is not delayed. It is not being reconsidered for a future date. The process is completely dead, and Harry has been forced to absorb this crushing psychological blow entirely alone in his California exile. Harry sent this final appeal not as a rogue royal or a public figure, but as a final, desperate act of hope. He explicitly asked for a strictly confidential meeting with Prince William, King Charles, and Princess Anne, offering to fly across the Atlantic completely alone without any media advisors, without cameras, without public statements, and without a single institutional demand. A reconciliation summit in the palace means a highly confidential family meeting intended to painstakingly repair basic human trust before any future royal role can even be whispered about. For Harry, this was never about reclaiming his lost status. It was a heartbreaking plea to remain a son, a brother, and a protective father whose young children, Archie and Lily, might otherwise inherit a permanent bleeding family wound. Prince William read the final page of that letter twice, his face pale under the dim palace lights. The future king placed the paper completely flat on the mahogany table and said absolutely nothing to the courtiers waiting in the room. He did not look victorious or smug. He looked utterly, deeply exhausted. Years of broken promises, unauthorized media leaks, explosive anger, and deep disappointment had taught the future king that a single unguided meeting could violently reopen every single emotional scar the family had fought to heal. When palace officials quietly asked for his final instruction, William answered clearly. No meeting would be arranged, and no reconciliation process would ever begin. No, it wasn't just William acting out of personal spite or cold revenge. He was looking at the tragic ghosts of his past, reading a hidden handwritten note that Harry had attached to the back of the folder, meant exclusively for his older brother's eyes. In that raw, hidden note, Harry explicitly referred to their mother, Princess Diana's chaotic childhood. Invoking a sacred childhood promise the two boys had made decades ago, a promise that neither brother would ever, under any circumstance, abandon the other. William stared at those words of his late mother echoing through the letter, and yet his answer remained an unyielding, freezing no. To understand why Prince William could reject his own brother so firmly, even when the memory of Princess Diana was weaponized against him, the hidden chain of events that brought the future king to this point of no return must be exposed. Behind the formal, polished language of palace press releases stand four real human beings carrying four completely different, heartbreaking versions of the exact same family tragedy. Harry sees nothing but cruel, unyielding rejection. William sees an active, unpredictable danger to his immediate household. Princess Anne sees a solemn duty being constantly tested by volatile emotion, and King Charles looks out his window, watching his two sons move completely beyond his earthly reach. The systemic collapse of this family didn't happen overnight. The reconciliation had actually failed long before Princess Anne finally gave that failure its official name. Months before Harry's final plea ever landed on the king's desk, a highly classified, secret effort had already been made by the palace to bring the two brothers back together. It was an incredibly quiet, carefully arranged operation, completely protected from the predatory gaze of the global public. No press announcements were prepared, and absolutely no photographers were informed. Princess Anne personally arranged the encounter at a secure private residence completely outside central London. She specifically chose an informal dinner setting because she knew that rigid palace formality and stiff courtiers had failed the brothers every single time before. The Princess Royal wanted Harry and William to look each other in the eye and speak openly, without high-priced advisors, prepared PR statements, or palace staff controlling every single word that left their mouths. Before the doors closed, both brothers gave their solemn word of honor that absolutely nothing said inside that room would ever travel beyond it. Harry arrived at that secret dinner genuinely believing that this informal setting could restore a functional path toward normal family life. He sat across from his older brother and told him flatly that Archie and Lily could not be forced to remain distant strangers to their own bloodline forever. The Duke desperately wanted his children brought closer to the center of the family network, not for the sake of grand royal titles or official state duties, but through raw personal contact and childhood memories. William sat in absolute silence, listening carefully to his brother's emotional pitch before answering with one single, firm, a non-negotiable condition: trust must come before access. That single phrase changed the course of the entire evening. It was a line drawn in the sand, but the real betrayal detonated just days later, when that exact, highly confidential phrase "trust must come before access" suddenly appeared word for word inside a private internal briefing circulated directly among Harry's team of high-level advisors. The leak was an absolute catastrophic breach of a sacred fraternal agreement. No official public statement had been released to the media, and not a single staff member had been permitted to attend that private dinner. Yet, William's exact, intimate words had somehow escaped the room and traveled directly into the hands of Harry's operational circle. William immediately confronted Harry by telephone, his voice trembling with controlled rage as he demanded to know how a sentence spoken without a single witness could possibly travel beyond those walls. Harry fiercely denied authorizing any form of disclosure, insisting with absolute vehemence that he had not broken their brotherhood agreement. But the future king heard only another empty explanation. Without any real control, another private promise followed instantly by public danger. Harry's anger rose rapidly over the line, aggressively telling William that he could not be held personally blamed for every single conversation happening around his camp. The Duke accused the future king of actively using suspicion as a convenient excuse to completely avoid the hard work of forgiveness. That heavy accusation hardened William instantly. What Harry saw as an unfair, paranoid judgment, the prince saw as definitive proof that responsibility within Harry's circle would always be pushed elsewhere. Princess Anne had explicitly warned both men before the dinner that a single breach of confidentiality would permanently end her involvement as a mediator. The moment that leaked phrase circulated, she contacted both brothers through separate, recorded palace lines and demanded a full, unvarnished explanation. Neither brother could provide a single answer that satisfied her iron standards. The trusted mediator instantly understood that the experiment was over. The reconciliation had completely collapsed under the weight of broken trust. William's written refusal should have been the definitive end of the matter, but Harry refused to let the door slam shut. Operating through a private intermediary, the Duke successfully secured a brief, unscripted encounter with his brother before the palace administrative team could formally log and close the request. There were no cameras allowed, no senior aides to buffer the tension, and no carefully polished royal speeches. It was just two estranged brothers standing face to face inside the ruins of a relationship that the world once considered completely unbreakable. Harry arrived at the private royal property, knowing William was locked inside for a scheduled high-level briefing. Princess Anne intentionally allowed a strict 10-minute window for the ambush, firmly believing that a raw, direct exchange would at least prevent fresh public claims from California that the younger prince had been denied his right to speak to his family. She dismissed the guards, closed the heavy adjoining door, and left the two brothers entirely alone without legal teams, prepared notes, or polite palace language to protect them from each other. Harry spoke first, his voice heavy with emotion, as he begged William to approve just one single family meeting involving King Charles and the young grandchildren. He promised absolute, ironclad silence going forward. He openly accepted the reality that no royal duties or patronages would ever be restored to him. All he wanted was a human path back to personal contact before the emotional distance became permanent. But William did not soften a single inch. The prince looked at his brother and stated coldly that this conflict was no longer about geography, grand titles, or royal protocol. No, William made it brutally clear that regret without fundamentally changed behavior can never rebuild physical safety. Every single past attempt to repair this relationship had ended with their private family pain becoming public material for the media machine. Harry desperately reached out, placing a hand on the back of a chair, and explicitly reminded William of the solemn promise they had made to each other standing over their mother Princess Diana's casket, that they would never let the other stand alone. The emotional weapon struck hard, and the future king's expression changed into a mask of pain, but his definitive answer did not alter. Harry heard nothing but cold, institutional punishment, while his brother was internally fighting for absolute family survival. When the 10 minutes expired and their voices began to visibly rise through the heavy oak doors, Princess Anne returned to the room. Harry turned toward his aunt, his eyes pleading for a final shred of support. But the Princess Royal completely refused to offer it. Through that devastatingly quiet conversation, witnessed exclusively by the three of them, she declared with absolute finality that the British monarchy could not keep reopening a toxic, volatile process that severely damaged every single member of the family each time it failed. Her historic role as the family mediator was officially over. Harry, stunned by her coldness, asked whether this terrifying decision was permanent. William looked at him, his voice dangerously low, and delivered the final blow. The process is over. Harry believed that personal anger and sibling rivalry had defeated him, but the brutal refusal actually rested on something far larger: William's rapidly growing operational authority inside a monarchy that was already actively preparing for succession. Harry had traveled across the world to appeal to a wounded brother, but he received the unyielding answer of a future king. William's refusal carried absolute institutional weight because King Charles had quietly begun shifting massive long-term responsibilities toward his direct heir. Charles remained the sovereign on paper, yet critical decisions involving long-term family access, institutional protection parameters, and the regulation of the next generation increasingly required the Prince of Wales's personal stamp of approval. King Charles sat in his private library for several minutes, staring blankly at Harry's unopened letter, which had been placed directly beside a small, framed family photograph of his two sons as young boys. The aging monarch desperately wanted to hear his younger son's voice one last time, but he was trapped in an agonizing constitutional paradox. He knew that forcing William into another unwanted summit could permanently tear his two sons further apart. He slowly reached for his telephone, intending to manually intervene and overrule the refusal. But before the call could connect, the king slowly lowered the receiver and ended it. Overruling his direct heir might briefly reopen contact with Harry, but it would completely destroy the fragile, vital trust remaining with the son who would one day wear his crown. William then made an unexpected, deeply profound offer to his father behind closed doors. The prince told the king that the palace administration could place the entire, brutal weight of the refusal directly onto his shoulders. He told Charles that he would willingly accept the global media anger, and he would carry 100% of the public blame. The future king did not want King Charles to be remembered by history as the cold father who abandoned his younger son during a desperate, final appeal. He took the bullet for the king, ensuring that the protective boundary around his own children George, Charlotte, and Louis remained permanently sealed from the toxic fallout of the adult conflict.